Welcome to Wise Guys.
Millennial Insights in a Changing America.
Today, we'll be talking about the American political spectrum. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the different political ideologies in America and how that maps onto party.
We think we've identified 7 different types of ideologies that fall across the liberal and conservative spectrum from left to right.
Right, and when we talk about spectrum, we really mean those who believe in more government control are on the left, and those who believe in less government control are on the right, and that these 7 different distinct ideologies really kind of map out into really large voter blocks.
Absolutely, and it's really important to remember that the way these terms, liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republican, the way they're used here in America is not the same across the board. In a lot of different countries, France, Germany, China, these are absolutely different terms and they're on a different spectrum.
So let's start from left to right. And I would say in America, the biggest group that's the farthest left, I would say, is the progressives.
Yeah, the progressives, as we're labeling them, are a group that has gotten a lot of attention recently because they had a champion in Bernie Sanders in the 2016 Democratic primary. As anyone who's keeping up with the primary or the election in general knows, Bernie Sanders was really espousing this progressive democratic socialist, as he identifies himself, branch of liberal ideology. Another major figure is Elizabeth Warren. We think progressives really have a few key things that tie them all together.
Right, and I think when you look at both the economic and the social sphere, they see a larger role for government. And I think it's fair to say that they would like to move us towards more of a European model, where in both of those spheres, the government has a lot more to say. There's a lot more leverage it can bring on what people get paid, how they're hired, how the employer can treat the employee.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's also important to remember that while, no one group is completely espoused by one person, and Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders are definitely the leaders of this kind of ideology, it's fair to say progressives in general are a lot more focused on specific domestic, social, and economic policy, and they don't give as much, power to their thoughts on foreign policy and national security.
I'd say, to be fair to them, I mean, the reason I think that you don't have that is because they haven't necessarily been in power.
Absolutely.
So I think once you are in the offices, once you're dealing with foreign policy, then that's kind of where you would more develop your views.
No, I definitely agree. And I mean, if we remember, Bernie Sanders, even when he was debating Hillary Clinton, kind of went out of his way to not talk too much about foreign policy. There was one question out of all the ones asked in the several debates, and even then he didn't give it that much time. And another person who could be a future leader of the Progressive Party is Keith Ellison, who is now the deputy director of the DNC. And we talked about him in an earlier video, which you can feel free to link to and check it out later.
Right. And to finish up the progressives, I would say my feeling for them right now is there was a groundswell of support. They united a little bit under Bernie.
Yeah.
And I think now is a big opportunity for them. They have to figure out really what's the next step. They have to figure out what's the next step, and it's probably an organizational thing.
I definitely think so. And I think actually the millennials are the ones that are really pushing for this mindset. I mean, the majority of the Bernie supporters or Bernie bros and the progressives that were there were definitely of our Generation Y, which makes it even more interesting to see how it'll play out in the future.
Yeah, Gen Y is going to be big for them.
Absolutely.
Right, moving to the right, but I would still say on the left side of the spectrum.
Absolutely.
In America, you have the
Barrios.
Barrios.
And the way we're describing the Barrios are really the Barack Obama voters and the people with the mindset that was pro-Al Gore, pro-Kerry, pro-Barack Obama, but didn't necessarily show up for Hillary Clinton and is different from the same mindset that voted for Bill Clinton back in the 90s. I think the Barrios have a few things in common. I think a lot of them are really truly believe it's time to make a socially liberal transition in the way the government impacts and laws impact a lot of these different liberal standings, from, marijuana usage to LGBTQ rights, in a lot of cases to the freedom of choice and abortions.
I think that this party while socially liberal, is probably a little hesitant economically to embrace socialism. I don't think, and I think there's a good measure of moderation there. I think Barack Obama probably governed more moderate than he campaigned, but I think surprised some people.
Yeah.
And I think this is really where most of the Democratic Party is. The Barrios kind of have to figure out what they believe when Barack Obama is not the visible leader of the party in the White House.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we mentioned in our Future of the Democratic Party video, their Barrios and the progressives have to find some unified ground for them to have this kind of future.
Right. They got to live in the same house.
Right, exactly. So moving even further right, we have pretty close to the center what we've labeled as the Bill Clinton Blue Dogs. The Bill Clinton Blue Dogs are the people who generally do espouse what could be considered liberal ideologies, but voted for Bill Clinton in the 1990s for different reasons than they would have for the Barrios and that kind of movement.
Right. I mean, remember Bill Clinton came in saying the era of big government was over. And he made some changes like cutting capital gains tax, there was social welfare reform. There's a lot of things that he did, I would say, that wouldn't be within the Barrios wheelhouse.
Yeah.
I would disagree with some of that. But, I mean, and we also have to say that Bill Clinton and the Blue Dogs are different from Hillary Clinton supporters.
Oh, absolutely. I think one thing that, most pundits have probably pointed out, and I mean, definitely have, is that Bill Clinton reached out to the people that were his supporters in a way that Hillary couldn't access.
Right.
A lot of that is, it's the economy, stupid, and it's like simple arithmetic. Is Bill being from Arkansas, son of a single parent, he was absolutely able to reach to a cultural standing and a level of, I guess, voter connection.
Sympathy.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
He understood exactly where they were coming from, but also was able to get in with, I guess, what's being referred to as the coastal elites, which tend to make up the mindset of the leaders of the Barrios, the progressives, or at least that's what they're portrayed as. Right. He was able to make both those lines and toy both those lines.
And one of the reasons I think he was successful is, like we're saying, he bridged the middle of the party to the Blue Dogs.
Right. And so
the Democrats have to figure that out right now.
Yeah.
Where is the bridge and how they're going to build it?
So in summation, these voters are probably similar in overall idea of wanting more socially liberal and I guess generally more government involvement than others, but also are willing to realize that there are some like parts to their ideology where they believe that the government shouldn't step in, and that comes from a different, maybe more rural,
cultural,
less urban type of
urban background.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've passed the center now, and we're going to move into the further right area and what today would be defined as a part of the Republican Party.
Now moving across the center and to the first group on the right, I would say that you have the Romney Republicans. Now these are people that are mostly fiscally and economically conservative.
Yeah.
But because they tend to live in more urban areas, they really have, I would say, more liberal cultural views.
I'd say those social or cultural views are also transforming really quickly too. I don't think this would have been true of what we're labeling as the Romney Republicans in 2002. But now, even the people that voted for him when he was running in 2012, a lot of them did believe in what is considered socially liberal policies. And he, on multiple occasions, had to say, I'm not going to really try and go against the grain on that. And that's a little more government controlled than a lot of the other conservatives usually have, which is why we place them closer to the center.
Right. And, even though we're calling them Romney Republicans, this group really has deep roots.
Absolutely.
And it's Republicans that really live on the coastal areas. They're usually a little bit more affluent, kind of like the...
Slightly better educated, too.
I would say they share more demographic indicators with the Barrios than they do with other left or right-wing groups. I'd say they come kind of from the same group of people.
Right, and it kind of comes down to the principle on what they believe in a lot of, economic, national security, and really simply government control issues.
Right.
Now, slightly more right to them is where we have a new group that gained a lot of prominence in 2016, not because it didn't exist before, but because they weren't necessarily labeled as their own group until now.
Right, and I think there's really two groups on this spectrum that haven't had a lot of representation recently.
Absolutely.
Those are actually the Bill Clinton Blue Dogs, and on the right you have what we're going to call now the Trumpsters. So these are people that are less urban. I would say they're more rural and more suburban.
Yeah.
And there's our working folks, and they probably have a lower level of education than I would say the Romney Republicans.
Or at least a different type of education, right? These aren't your 4-year degree, get a white-collar job type
More
education.
vocational training.
Absolutely, yeah.
And, they, I think, have felt like they've been not represented well.
Neglected.
In the government.
Simply.
And neglected,
Yeah.
right. I think that this group is a base of power that only Trump is competing for right now.
Right, and I think we saw that in 2016. That much was clear if we just look geographically at where a lot of the Trump stirs were. If we're looking at people who weren't necessarily voting before or used to vote Democrat, didn't vote Democrat in 2016, it tends to be the same places that Trump actually spent a lot of time campaigning in, and Hillary didn't, right? And that's
a lot of Rust Belt states, a lot of Midwest states.
That represents the whole, they feel neglected. The candidate wouldn't even come and speak to them. And they are a base of power that continues to support him today. A lot of has happened since President Trump was elected that hasn't necessarily been the best thing for Trump, or at least the way it's presented in the media. And the Trumpsters are still pretty solidly behind him.
Right. I think half of that is because they don't have anybody else competing for their votes, really.
Yeah, no one's reaching out to them yet. So moving past the Trumpsters is an area even further right, but one that's a little more understandable. And we're talking movement conservatives here. What we define as movement conservatives aren't Republican Party conservatives necessarily. They're conservatives first, party second.
These are people that are traditionally pro-gun, pro-life. They tend to be more Christian than the
usually
popular. They tend to have they tend to get married and have kids earlier.
Yeah.
And they are they're not going anywhere. They're one of the biggest and most consistent ideological groups in America. There's not a lot of change in their support numbers, or their ideology, and it's really their touchstone is Ronald Reagan.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it has had a large representation in this country.
Finally, on the furthest right that we're going to identify today on the spectrum is the Libertarians. I don't think this group needs too much explanation. It's a pretty well-known part of the American political spectrum, though it doesn't necessarily have that much power, despite the fact that a lot of people know what they are. Right,
and I think with the Libertarians, remember our spectrum is more government control to less government control.
Right.
And the Libertarians, they look at the Constitution and they look at what they think the proper role the Constitution is in our personal lives, and they do not see a lot of areas, whether it's economically or socially, that there's any room for that level of control.
Right.
So we place them a lot more to the right than even movement conservatives.
Absolutely. Again, I think that the Libertarian Party today has been impacted by the social changes across America, and I think that they go out of their way not to talk a lot about foreign policy, which could have been their downfall in 2016. Gary Johnson asking, what is Aleppo, really did not help the Libertarian Party overall. But I think the Libertarian mindset and the principles that go behind it still have a strong hold on a large number of Americans.
And especially millennials.
Absolutely.
I'd say it's actually kind of interesting that both progressives, the farthest left,
right, the extremes,
and libertarians, the farthest right, I think have a lot of millennial. There's a lot of Gen Ys in both of those camps.
Yep.
And they both are kind of suffering from the same problem. Haven't really been in power in the executive branch.
Right.
So you're going to see a lot less foreign policy cred from these guys.
So what we've basically tried to lay out here is an understanding of the way the main political groups, as we've identified them, work in America, and how these different pockets of voters and demographics can really shift the spectrum and the way that American policy is created and people are actually thinking about politics today. As always, if you have any questions, comments or other things you'd like us to discuss, or problems you've had with our video, feel free to shoot us an email. Our Gmail link is down there, and then follow us on Facebook and keep watching. We'll have some more videos out for you. Thanks.